So this is my second time presenting at Casual Connect Singapore, Asia. So I guess that means 2 out of 2 years. Hopefully I do a good enough job that they'll ask me back for a third year. And just want to thank Jessica and her team for having me here. This series of conferences is truly one of the highest quality conferences that I've been to, and I cover a broad group of digital media, e-commerce, and video game companies, so I do consider this to be one of the preeminent events. This will be a high-level presentation. Last year we talked about smart and social and encouraged developers to focus on a market of games for smartphones that integrated social features, and this would take advantage not only of the exponential growth in smartphones and social networks, but also drive and deliver significant growth as well for games. And over the past 12 months, I think we've seen this in spades. Games like Candy Crush are examples of those that really combine well smart and social features and drive monetization. This year we're presenting a little bit different theme, I think a derivative of last year's theme in smart and social, and that's what we're calling the next wave of smart growth in tablets and TVs. By way of just quick background, I am the senior research analyst at Baird in the San Francisco office of Robert Baird and Company, a private investment bank. I've covered video games and digital media for about 12 years. And for the video game industry, I'm always struck by one phenomenon which I encounter over and over again, and that's that video games are the most important form of media, of digital media. And there are more people playing games, spending more money than ever before. And meanwhile, traditional media in all its forms continues to struggle. And as game apps move to tablets and then TVs, monetization will improve. And we're seeing tablet games obviously quickly emerging, and games made specifically for tablet form factors are monetizing particularly well. So we see 4 screens of games being really important. Obviously the phone, the computer, and the tablet, but also for game apps, the television. People are accessing or will access the internet on each of these devices at different times of day, and there's a need for different media depending upon where people are and what they're doing. And this is not just games, this is for any form of media or content site. For example, Amazon, the shopping website, is a very different experience than Amazon, the mobile app. And this web-based experience that existed first on computers and then phones and now tablets will extend fairly quickly to the living room. For now, smartphones obviously still on the rise. Smartphone sales continue to look exponential. We now have more than 1 billion smartphones around the world, and this is ultimately how most people are going to access the internet. And we remain very bullish on the smartphone market. We continue to see this as a very positive tailwind for the video game industry. And within this trend, Android is significantly increasing its installed base and its market share. This is a significant trend in terms of the video game business, with Apple still considered the preeminent platform in some Western markets, and that's still true in terms of monetization. But in terms of incremental growth, Android is the most important mobile operating system in our view, followed by iOS, and that monetization gap we think will slowly close. Case in point, in Japan, in the last 6 months we've seen Android gain significant share. Games, as you know, are the killer app on these devices. Here's one stat that really drives home the point. In terms of spending on apps on Apple's App Store and Google Play, games make up between 70 or more than 80% of consumer spending. And in Q1 that was even higher. And it's remarkable to think about all these smartphones and tablets are to some extent primarily gaming devices. So, just to wrap up on the phone side, key trends here. We talked about Android as an important operating system. Also, consumers are buying more phones with bigger screens, faster processors, but also much lower prices than just a year ago. And for developers, this is also providing a funnel to reach a much larger base of consumers in emerging markets such as India, Russia, China, and Brazil. And here is one of the most, I think, important developments to consider on the phone side, and that's high-speed mobile networks, such as 4G LTE. This is dramatically improving the usability of smartphones, and really, we expect drive accelerating growth in content consumption. So to kind of drive that home, let's look at a fact from 2012. Smartphones represented only 18% of total global handsets in use, but represented 92% of total global handset traffic. Lots of data consumption and usage. This makes sense. People have mobile apps, browsers, and this really opens up the web on phones. In terms of 4G LTE, here's a heat map. The darker green represents countries yet to be deployed with 4G LTE. Beginning in 2010 with just a couple of markets, such as the US, by 2016, 4G will be deployed for the majority of the people around the world. So what happens when people have 4G access? In 2012, 4G connections generated 19 times more traffic on average on smartphones than non-4G connections. So smartphones are less than 10% of the market, but they drive almost 20 times more content consumption. So let's be clear about this. This is driving a significant wave of growth online, and as we know, games are a key beneficiary of that increase. Moving on to tablets, here is our forecast for tablets, the install base of tablets over the next few years, also looking exponential in terms of the growth curve. This is also corresponding to a decline in PC sales. There's a structural shift, a secular shift in consumer electronics, whereby sales of PCs are declining. That's very unlikely to change. Tablets are becoming a key device for consumers, both personally as well as at work and businesses. And we think our forecasts are likely to prove conservative. But in 2 years, there will be about 1 billion tablets. And in the most lucrative markets, tablets are already mainstream. So to put a little bit of context around this, connected tablets, which is essentially every tablet, will generate more online traffic in 2017 than the entire global mobile network in 2012. And this is actually not an exaggeration or even a pie-in-the-sky forecast. The variables are the number of tablets, the access to high-speed data networks, and then consumption patterns on these devices. And these are all fairly quantifiable variables. The bottom line, if you're not already developing games for tablets, then you probably need to start thinking about it. Core versus casual games, which I think this conference has morphed a bit. A couple of years ago at Casual Connect, we mostly saw just casual game developers. With mid-core, I think those lines are blurring quite a bit. But it brings the question about what kinds of games monetize the best on tablets. And I'm sure you all know that tablets can attract gamers who like core games. In this respect, the tablet market will look more like the console and the PC game market. It's a lucrative market. These games will generate higher conversion rates to paid, and those paying users will spend more than the typical casual gamer. So we put this all together, smartphone and tablet games. This is our revised forecast, higher forecast this year for this segment of the video game market. Globally, this segment will generate about $8 billion in revenues, and by 2016 should be just as large as any other single segment in the video game market. And this forecast contemplates a fairly modest ramp in 4G high-speed networks. So if those networks are deployed more rapidly, then this curve could look even higher. So just thought I'd spice things up a little bit with this cartoon, The Elephant in the Living Room. I could end the presentation there. Tablets and phones are very lucrative. All of you are likely involved to some extent on both of those platforms, and with justifiable enthusiasm. But from my point of view, what may be even more exciting if you have the vision to look 3, 4, 5 years down the road is what happens in the living room. And TVs do one or two things today really well, but they're not dynamic internet devices. Consider, though, that people spend hours every day watching content served from this large screen, from large media companies and cable and satellite networks they're big and fat and generate lots of margin. Today, the living room entertainment ecosystem is a little bit like the featured phone market a few years ago. But this is all going to change, and if we could fast forward 2 or 3 years to this conference, I think we'll see a remarkable shift in terms of game apps and where you find the app stores. And so this is the proverbial elephant in the room. So connected TVs, it's not a new theme, but what happens when televisions become connected internet devices? What happens when Android and iOS and Samsung with their mobile operating systems become standard on every new TV sold, and combine that with access to high-speed internet networks? You can see the living room battlefield is already taking shape. This morning in Seattle, Microsoft announced Xbox One. This is squarely aimed at a competitive market against Google and Apple, in our view, and Samsung and Sony. And other platform companies are going to be in the living room in a big way. And you should be thinking about how to take advantage of this. And ultimately, we'll have content in the living room delivered over internet connections. That's video, that's live sports, that's games, and that's advertising. And the app stores are going to be on every new TV, as I mentioned. The user interface will look probably a lot like what consumers are now used to on tablets. And those tablets and phones may even serve content to the TV, depending upon if it's a dumb terminal or a smart TV. So why should you care? Well, when you have a bunch of large media, telecom, hardware companies battling for survival and market share, that provides a huge opportunity for content creators. The value of the content rises. And in online video, another sector that I cover, we're already seeing Hollywood content increasing in value pretty quickly as Netflix and Amazon and Google and LoveFilm are all bidding up the value of that content to lock up content relationships. And we think games are going to be a powerful weapon that these media companies and these hardware companies also use in the living room. The audience is also both core and casual. So regardless of your focus as a developer, there's a market here. This is a quantifiable, it's a known market. Console games generate a significant amount of money. I think our forecast is about $15 billion annualized globally, much larger than the PC game market. The fact is that consumers like to purchase games in the living room. So we see an appification of the TV evolving. I think a lot of the examples we've seen to date have been obviously very early, but also don't really represent the potential for this market. From the consumer perspective, the concept of channels and networks will shift to apps. There'll be video apps with access to traditional video content. There will also be gaming apps and shopping apps and communication apps, just like on every other connected device. If I don't have your attention yet on TVs, maybe this chart will help get you excited. How much leisure time do people have every day, and where do they spend that time? So more than half of the time is spent watching TV. And that's not just in the US, that's a global phenomenon. 40 minutes is spent talking and socializing, 20 minutes reading, 20 minutes on sports and exercise, 25 minutes playing games. You're all today basically fighting for share of that 25 minutes in each person's day. With the move to connected TVs, and we think the app stores, which are dominated by games, your addressable opportunity for people's attention just increased by about 7 times. So I realize that this is looking into the crystal ball a bit, and there isn't a whole lot you can do necessarily today. But one thing to keep in mind is that companies, developers today that are successful on iOS and Android and other mobile and tablet operating systems are going to have an advantage on the TV when this market extends to those devices. So if you don't yet believe that Apple and Google are going to fight for the living room and drive significant change, let me just at least mention Google Fiber. This is Google's project in a couple of markets in the US where they're providing ultra high-speed broadband access for relatively modest fees. And why is Google doing this? Because they know that this market will evolve very quickly, whereby the internet drives content and advertising and consumption in the living room, and they want to be there in a big way. So as we think about platforms and operating systems in the years ahead, we are moving Android and iOS and potentially Windows as well. We are seeing that extend significantly, and TVs are going to even drive more market share for these operating systems. I mentioned before the global market for living room games. When we've spoken to video game companies about these trends, and our view here often is that they bring up that the console market is declining, and even next-gen platforms like Nintendo's Wii U have been a failure to date. But this is not a reason to avoid the living room, but it means that there's a huge opportunity for you to get a slice of this market. So just to kind of wrap it up here, the smartphone market is already proven. It's very competitive. I've given presentations where companies were not convinced about this market 2 years ago, and here we are today when it's already a significant portion of revenues for large companies and the only driver of business for a lot of smaller companies. Tablets are next. I guess they're actually now. You should be making games specifically for tablets, and if done well and from a monetization point of view, could even be a more lucrative opportunity. And then third, as a third wave of growth, connected TVs in the next few years. And consider the fact that franchises are very important by pursuing a cross-platform strategy. So having the next Angry Birds or Bejeweled or Candy Crush on those living room screens, or more simply extending what you have from the smaller screens, becoming truly cross-platform is a significant opportunity. And then just lastly, know that if you aren't platform diversified, if you're not considering these trends, you want to consider that it's likely not a great strategy to be dependent on just one platform. Do what you can to diversify the business. This is, if you're not able to guess, this is Zynga's bookings and its stock price, and it's a very recognizable shrinking of their business, but a good lesson for all of us in the industry. And fortunately, there's plenty of opportunity across these platforms. So keep the focus on phones, but also consider tablets and televisions. And that's all I have for you. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Go ahead.
There's been a lot of talk about the growth of Android in the last couple of years, especially versus iOS, but the monetization doesn't seem to really move a whole lot in terms of staying in iOS's favor. What do you think will be the tipping point that will, when the monetization of Android begins to mirror the growth of the handsets themselves, and what do you think the main problem is?
I'm not really sure if there's a problem. I think that there's a maturity of applications on the respective operating systems. I think as many developers develop for iOS first and then consider Android as sort of a platform extension, that does tend to influence monetization. And certainly iOS has been dominant in Western markets such as the US and Western Europe, where monetization naturally is higher. But even in those markets, as you point out, there is a gap. I think we're seeing that gap start to shrink. I think as developers begin to focus more with an Android first strategy, you'll start to see that shrink even further. I think as Google starts to focus more on curating Google Play Store, you're also going to see that become a little bit, you won't see as much of a disparity as you have in the past. But I do think that Apple will retain at least some advantage there on monetization. Anything else?
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned Microsoft, and obviously Apple and Google fighting out for the living room. What about Samsung with regards to obviously, themselves working with Apple and the issues there, and then being too reliant potentially on Android and looking for other alternatives, and all these app stores are owned by these other parties, and Samsung's hasn't exactly been successful, and yet they're obviously massive with regards to TVs. So how do you see seeing Samsung play out in the living room?
I think that's a great question. I mean, obviously Samsung has had massive success on the hardware side, the consumer device side, TVs, phones, and tablets. I think the way to think about Samsung is that it's incredibly hard for a hardware company to become a software company, to be an operating system company. Apple and Google and Microsoft and others have tremendous resources, engineering capabilities that I don't think Samsung can hope to match. I think ultimately Samsung needs to focus on the devices and curating those devices, for these different opportunities. But ultimately, there's so much scale already with Apple and Google that those are likely to be, just a couple of the maybe 2 or 3 successful operating systems. All right, well, thank you very much.